Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled Bewitched, Elizabeth Montgomery. Remember Elizabeth Montgomery? She's best known for her portrayal of Samantha Stevens in the ABC sitcom television show Bewitched, which ran from 1964 until 1972. That's 8 seasons of television entertainment. Now, Elizabeth Montgomery didn't just come from under a rock. Of course, she was born into the Hollywood cult. She is the daughter of Robert Montgomery, who was twice, I said twice, president of the Screen Actors Guild, which is Hollywood CIA Pacification and Control Monitoring Center. Screen Actors Guild, SAG, best known as SAG, which is a CIA three-letter term, military intelligence, because it was OSS when SAG was invented back in the late 1920s, early 1930s is when SAG came into being. It had existed in previous incarnations prior to being labeled as Screen Actors Guild. Anyway, Elizabeth Montgomery did play other roles and was used as a social influencer engineer, which you know is standard for Hollywood actresses. She also did some bikini modeling, which is required if you're going to get a job in Hollywood. They like good-looking actors and actresses. And you should know that as Samantha Stevens was a good witch, you know, like Gilda from The Wizard of Oz. You know, Gilda was the good witch from the South, and who mentored Dorothy to follow the Yellow Brick Road, but then eventually click her ruby slippers 3 times and just dream her way home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. And that this would be the solution to her problem of the Matrix, where she was trapped with the mighty powerful Wizard of Oz, the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, who doesn't exist in real life. He only exists in the Matrix. Anyway, I'm going to read you a tribute to the Samantha Stevens Good Witch, who pledged to live a life as a mortal being when she married Darren Stevens. Hair of gold, eyes that twinkle, a nose that neatly twitched, clever, charming, and enchanting, Samantha left us all bewitched. Now, what does it mean to be bewitched? I think we've all know what that means if you've fallen under the enchanted spell of another person, right? So there's a number of definitions. The first one is that it's to enchant or delight someone, okay? I think that's the most harmless definition of the word bewitch or bewitched, which is past tense. But I think when Hollywood and clandestine service, CIA, and bank anthropologists get involved with Hollywood, I think we all know that bewitched means to cast a spell over someone. All right? Like you fall in love and you just can find nothing wrong with your new love, right? You're bewitched, otherwise known as psyched out. So this was sort of the indirect messaging coming from the episodes of the television show, which is owned by Disney Corporation, ABC. And of course, ABC is home to the Enchanted Kingdom. They want to capture your imagination and thereby capture your mind. So of course, they would own the television show Bewitched, which featured a bad witch. Samantha's mother, Andorra, was unhappy and disapproved of the marriage to Darren, which he always referred to as Darwood. Oh, there's Darwood again. Anyway, so she didn't approve that her daughter marry a mere mortal. And you should know that Andorra was, of course, played by Agnes Moorehead, who is 33 years older than Elizabeth Montgomery. Agnes Moorehead lived on North Roxbury Drive, was a neighbor of Peter Falk Colombo was a neighbor of Lionel Barrymore, Jimmy Stewart, Jack Benny, Lucille Ball, the Gershwin brothers, George and Ira Gershwin, and she lived on North Roxbury in Benedict Canyon. Technically, it's Holmby Hills, but it's right below the Sharon Tate murder scene. Agnes Moorehead lived below the Sharon Tate murder scene. Okay? And so did Elizabeth Montgomery. Elizabeth Montgomery eventually, when she became more of a well-paid social influencer in Hollywood, she moved to Benedict Canyon. Yes, she did. She moved to 1230 Benedict Canyon Drive, off Benedict Canyon Drive. In other words, a cul-de-sac. She lived on the left side of Benedict Canyon Drive cul-de-sac off Benedict Canyon Drive. And if you're wondering whereabouts that is, well, I'll tell you, it's 450 yards away from where William Randolph Hearst's good friend Thomas Ince was murdered. He was found dead at 1051 Benedict Canyon Drive, 400 yards away from where Elizabeth Victoria Montgomery died in her home, 400 yards away from where Marion Davies's married lover, Thomas Ince, was found dead in his home on Benedict Canyon Drive. That was back in 1924. And that's also directly below the Sharon Tate murder scene. And you should know that where Elizabeth Montgomery resided there at 1230 Benedict Canyon Drive, that is just below where Scott Ridley, the brother of Sir Ridley Scott, Tony Scott. Tony Scott is the younger brother, Hollywood director, Top Gun, that committed suicide by being tossed off the Thomas Vincent Bridge in San Pedro. Well, he lived at 1500 Seabright Place, which is directly above Elizabeth Montgomery's home at 1230 Benedict Canyon. And he's 300 yards away from where Doris Duke lived in the Rudy Altobelli home at 1436 Bella Drive, right? That's called Falcon Lair. That's like 250 yards from the Sharon Tate murder scene front gate. You can see right at the front gate where the murder scene was, where 5 people were murdered, mostly by bayonets. You can see that from 1436 Bella Drive, which is next door to where Tony Scott was done away with, and he lived at the end of a dead-end cul-de-sac called 1500 Seabright Place, which is right above the cul-de-sac where Elizabeth Montgomery lived at 1230 Benedict Canyon, which is about a third of a mile from where Andorra, her fake mother-in-law, lived. Agnes Moorehead, she lived at North Roxbury Drive, and I have the address somewhere, I can't find it. But anyway, it's near Peter Falk, near Jimmy Stewart. It's a few houses from Jimmy Stewart. I guess what you should know is that this is like a little colony for the social influencers that are under the control of the CIA, right? And then this is a military place where people get murdered. Superman, George Reeves, was murdered up the hill, along with Jean Harlow's 42-year-old husband. When Jean Harlow was 21 years old, her 42-year-old husband, Paul Levy Byrne, a Jewish man, put on her perfume and then shot himself in the back of the head with a .38 after typing up a suicide note just above the Elizabeth Montgomery house. Within 1 mile. All right. Anyway, so Elizabeth Montgomery, she went to the Westlake all-girls school. It was at one time a military academy for boys, but then it became an all-girls school, the Westlake School. It's also directly below the Sharon Tate murder scene, off Angelo Drive, off Sunbrook Drive, which is where Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger were bayoneted to death, off Angelo Drive. Forget Cielo Drive. They were closer to Sunbrook Drive. They were right above Sunbrook Drive. If you have any questions, just ask Oliver Silverstein Stone. He's been there, okay? So he knows the property. He knows where the soldiers went to go kill everybody on that property, because he was in the Timothy Leary house on St. Patrick's Day in 1996. So Oliver Stone knows exactly what I'm talking about right here. And that is walking distance to the Westlake All-Girls School, which, by the way, looks like a fortress. It looks like a prison center. It's got these imposing steel gates all around the perimeter there. It's off Beverly Glen Boulevard and Angelo Drive. It's straddled right between the two of them. Again, directly below the Sharon Tate murder scene is Westlake School. It is now called Harvard Westlake School. But Elizabeth Montgomery went there when her big shot father, Robert Montgomery, not his real name is Henry Montgomery Jr., is born in Beacon, New York, which is home to their state hospital for the criminally insane, which is called Mattawan State Hospital. You know, that's where the Mad Bomber of New York, who terrorized New York and Brooklyn for 16 years, George Metesky, that's where he got sent after he was convicted, after a CIA psychiatrist testified at his trial that he was insane, criminally insane. And nobody got killed in the New York, Brooklyn bombings. Nobody died. And there were 33 bombs planted, but only, I think, 16 of them detonated. But there were 33. There's that number again. There were 33 bombers from the Mad Bomber of Brooklyn. Ann Kernan was sent to the Beacon, New York, Mattawan State Hospital also. She murdered Dr. Albert Laverne's wife after he gave her electroshock treatments and poached her from a sociology class at Fordham University in the Bronx. So Ann Kernan was sent to Mattawan State Hospital along with the Mad Bomber of New York that didn't kill anyone. Ann Kernan killed Paula Passat, who's the wife of Albert Laverne, who I sort of think he wanted her gone. She was a much younger woman than him. I think she was 27 years old, and Dr. Laverne was like 43 years old. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that that's two criminally insane inmates of the Mattawan State Hospital, and this is the town that Elizabeth Montgomery's father was born. It has another name also, which I'm not going to get into, but it is now known as Beacon, New York. This is where Henry Montgomery Jr. came from. He was the first official president of the Screen Actors Guild, 1935 through 1938. He then served a second term it was an abbreviated term. It was about a 6-month term, 1946 through 1947, where he was quick like a bunny rabbit, replaced by Ronald Reagan. This is after World War II, and we start moving into the communist infiltration of the world, right? That was the communist psychops. Ronald Reagan took over from Robert Montgomery kind of prematurely. And there's a backstory there, and I don't know what it is, but Ronald Reagan took over from Robert Montgomery early. Ronald Reagan went on to 6 terms of president of SAG, but this was a 7th term, but it wasn't a full term. So Ronald Reagan served at least 6.5 terms for the Screen Actors Guild, whereas Robert Montgomery served, it appears to have been 3.5 terms as president. Ronald Reagan did 6.5, which I think's the most. I don't think anyone has done as much as Ronald Reagan for the Screen Actors Guild. And he also wore a wire for the FBI, had a code name, and was clandestine, supervised, and controlled the entire time. Anyone who's associated with SAG is going to be controlled, whether their name is Ronald Reagan or whether their name is Henry or Robert Montgomery. So, in other words, Elizabeth Montgomery was one of 3 children, but her older sister died in infancy. So really, Elizabeth Montgomery was the eldest child that survived, and then she had a younger brother, Robert Montgomery Jr. And Elizabeth Montgomery went right into show business, of course, because what choice did she have? She's born into the business, right? So after she went to the Westlake All-Girls School, they sent her to New York to an actor's Academy of Art, and she went to another school, and I'm going to post the link here. You can see her background. But essentially, she appeared in a number of Hollywood films, including one with Henry Silva. I don't know if you remember Henry Silva. He usually played a villain. Usually, Henry Silva played a villain. The reason I bring up Henry Silva is that I met him at a wedding. Yes, I did. And I remember distinctly that Henry Silva had perfect teeth. They were all capped. And he had a perfect suntan. And it was a dark suntan. And I believe the wedding was like first week of May. And there he was with his real estate sales girlfriend. You should know that Elizabeth Montgomery was married 4 times and divorced 3 times. Her last husband was Robert Foxwell. And Robert Foxwell, it was 8 years younger than Elizabeth Montgomery. That was her last husband. And you should know that Robert Foxwell appeared in a Columbo episode where he was the murderer. Oh, yes, he was. And you should know that Columbo comes in and out of the Elizabeth Montgomery story. Oh, yes, he does. Of course he does. I mean, besides the fact that he lives down the street. But anyway, Elizabeth Montgomery's career started out, she did a film with, oh, brother. I had all this in front of me. She did a film in Johnny Cool with Henry Silva, who I met. You know, I met him, I think, in the late 1980s. I met Henry Silva in Northern California. Around the same time, I met Joe DiMaggio. I met him in the early 1990s. A couple times, more than once. Henry Silva, I only met 1 time. Anyway, he usually plays a villain. He was in a Sylvester Stallone Rambo film as the, prisoner dilemma game torture creep. And anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that Elizabeth Montgomery played a young socialite who falls in love with Henry Silva, who's a gangster. He plays a gangster in Johnny Cool in 1963. But before that, she was in television series dramas known as Studio One, Kraft Television Theater, Johnny Staccato, Burke's Law, and of course a Twilight Zone episode. She also appeared in Wagon Train, Boris Karloff's Thriller, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. She appeared with her father on his show. Robert Montgomery had a series of television shows himself. Robert Montgomery Presents. So it's kind of like an Art Linkletter situation where the children appear in some of the work that the parents are doing, much like the clandestine services. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that William Colby's son was the next door neighbor of Nicole Brown Simpson over there off of Bundy. They were next door neighbors when she got murdered. I don't think that's a coincidence. That's the CIA laughing at you. He testified at both the preliminary hearing and then again at the O.J. Simpson murder trial. There's the son of William Colby, who had not yet been murdered. But he gets murdered shortly after the O.J. Simpson acquittal. Then, months after that, William Colby gets whacked in his kitchen. And you should know that William Colby is portrayed in a Columbo episode, Identity Crisis, in Benedict Canyon on the Enchanted Hillside by none other than the fellow that played Larry Tate. Larry Tate, who was Darren Stevens' boss, remember, at the advertising company? Anyway, you should know that, again, this is another Columbo situation here. Okay, so we know we had Agnes Moorehead played the mother-in-law in Dora, and then Darren Stevens' boss, Darren's boss was played by David White. David White also played the director of CIA in Identity Crisis, where they had a meeting atop Benedict Canyon with Patrick McGowan's character, who played a West Coast operative for CIA. Anyway, David White played William Colby before William Colby was actually murdered. Yeah, right above the Sharon Tate murder scene, there's David White playing William Colby and meeting with the top operative in Benedict Canyon above the Sharon Tate murder scene. After Sharon Tate had been murdered, but before the Larry Tate character gets killed, William Colby. So David White appeared in Bewitched and he appeared in Columbo. Right? Of course. All right. So the husband for Elizabeth Montgomery started out being Dick York. However, he had some issues, so he got replaced by Dick Sargent. I think Dick York had some health problems, and he was replaced by Dick Sargent. You should also know that as time went on, of course, Elizabeth Montgomery was used, like all Hollywood actresses are used, to promote wokeism and or whatever the du jour social anthropology of the day is. So she got into gay rights, AIDS research. She and Dick Sargent were master of ceremonies for the gay parade in Los Angeles. This is what if Sharon Tate hadn't have been done away with, or Marilyn Monroe hadn't have been murdered, or Inger Stevens hadn't have been murdered, or Cass Elliot hadn't have been murdered, they would have been the spokesperson for voting. John Denver hosted an episode of the Midnight Express music show, and he had Cass Elliot, who, by the way, that's not her real name, right? It's Naomi Ellen Cohen. She's Jewish. And she promoted that young people vote, that everyone should go out and vote. And you'll notice they always do that whenever there's resistance to the Vietnam War. They're saying you should vote, as if voting had anything whatsoever to do with what wars the banks want to fight. I mean, didn't we all vote during World War II? And we went to war anyway. Didn't we all vote during the Korean War? And we went to war anyway. Didn't we all vote during the 10 years of the Vietnam War? And we went to the war anyway. Didn't we all vote during the Afghanistan War? Yeah. And the Iraq War? Yeah. And did we go to war anyway? Yeah, we did. So again, there is zero correlation between voting and avoiding war. I mean, we go to war whether you vote or whether you don't vote. We put up 5G satellites in orbit whether you vote or whether you don't vote. And by the way, they're not on the ballot, right? In fact, they never had, do you want to go to the Vietnam War on a ballot? So again, I don't understand what voting has to do with chemtrail dumping over my head, which you can't vote on, or surveillance society, which you can't vote on, or digital bank currency, which you cannot vote on, or satellites above, which you cannot vote on. So again, there is no correlation in social engineering between a democracy and what the banks decide to do with the fake fiat digital money that they have. They do whatever they want. All right. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that Elizabeth Montgomery, known as Samantha Stevens, the Good Witch, she was used, of course, to promote whatever the social engineering influencer of the day. She was called a liberal. She was a liberal-minded woman. Whatever. You should know that she also played another character, Lizzie Borden, who was sort of like the Kitty and Jose Menendez murders, which the media told you the children did it, which I don't believe those boys killed their parents. I believe professional killers killed their parents. That's what I believe. Okay, now I understand it is a dysfunctional situation, the Menendez family. I mean, if you want to talk about a dysfunctional family, you could use the Jose Menendez family. I mean, when people make jokes about the Manson family, I mean, they don't know what they're talking about. First of all, there was no Manson family. And number two is Patricia Krenwinkel and Susan Atkins and Leslie Van Houten and Charlie Miles Maddox and Charlie Watson were very functional, nice, friendly people. Nothing dysfunctional about them at all. Okay? And most of them didn't have driver's licenses. And none of them had real jobs. Okay? So I had 5 people working for the clandestine services as crisis actors. They're used in a variety of different operations, from the People's Temple to wig salesmen, wig sales. Like Andrew Vajna, he was in the wig business too, just like Charles Tex Watson was. Well, not exactly. I mean, Charles Watson was a salesman, and Andrew Vajna, who's really Andrus Weidman, he owned the wig company, so it's kind of different. But you see, wigs go with being a spy, don't they? You change your appearance, right? So wigs and CIA go hand in hand. Same as military intelligence. So anyway, let me read you a little poem about the Lizzie Borden social engineering, because as you know, they want to program us into what to believe, since they don't want you to figure it out for yourself. They want to tell you what to believe. So here's a lovely little poem. All right, now the Lizzie Borden story was based on a true story, where a young woman, while she's 32 years old, living with her parents in, what town were they from? I think they were from, well anyway, I'll come back to the town where they resided. Anyway, so she's 32 years old. Her father is Andrew Borden. He's a bank president of Union Savings and Loan. He owns a company that makes coffins. He is on the board of directors of Durfee Safe and Deposit Trust Bank. So he's a director of one bank, and he's on the board of directors and the president of another bank. He owns a company that makes coffins, and he owns some textile companies and real estate. He originally was married to Sarah Anthony Morse, who bore Lizzie Borden, but they somehow got divorced, broke up, or she died, or whatever, and he married Abby Borden, who's the stepmother for Lizzie Borden, and I got the impression that not everybody liked Abby Borden. Anyway, both Abby Borden was axed 17 times to the head, so somebody didn't like Abby Borden, and that was around 10:30 in the morning, and then Andrew was out on a walk. He returns, and he goes into the sitting room to take a nap, which is kind of strange for 11 o'clock in the morning, and then he proceeds to get hatcheted to his head. I don't know how many times, but let me read this poem. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. Well, it's 17 in the autopsy report. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. The police arrived on the scene, seeing Lizzie, sweet and serene. 2 butchered bodies did find, handiwork of an insane mind. In the court, the judge did decree Lizzie's innocence and set her free. Parents' wealth she now possessed. Murder's easy, in her mind confessed. When in hell, the devil asked, did you perform this grisly task? Take a chance, an axe give me. Give me a nap, then wait and see, answered Lizzie Borden to the devil, Satan. All right, so anyway, that's sort of the story of the Menendez case, right? That's the story of the Menendez. That poem was the prosecution's case for the Menendez brothers. And of course, this is something that happened in gee whiz, 1922, I believe. No, 1892. 1892. Lizzie Borden was born in 1860. So, in other words, just before the United States Maine was sunk in the port of Havana, which was in 1898, 6 years before that, we had the Lizzie Borden murder of her 2 parents, and this poem was created. She was acquitted. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes, and they acquitted Lizzie Borden of murdering her parents, because the housekeeper was home when all this happened, and she didn't hear anything. And Lizzie Borden was home. So it was either the housekeeper, or it was Lizzie, or it was professional killers who came in and did it, right? It's a 3-story house. Anyway, it's not different than the Jose and Kitty Menendez murder. Very similar. And Hollywood doesn't have much of an imagination. They just rinse and repeat everything. So anyway, just wanted you to know that I find it bizarre that Elizabeth Montgomery's father came from the same city in New York State, Beacon, where the Mad Bomber from Brooklyn was, and that Ann Kernan was sent, and that you should know that that Robert Montgomery's father, Robert Montgomery Sr., he was the president of the New York Rubber Company, okay? The New York Rubber Company. And he jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge in 1922, committing suicide in much the same way that Tony Scott did, who's a neighbor of Elizabeth Montgomery in Benedict Canyon. Because remember, he jumped off the Vincent Thomas Bridge. So I wonder if Robert Montgomery's father was thrown off the Brooklyn Bridge in 1922. Anyway, I think it's bizarre that Elizabeth Montgomery's neighbor, Tony Scott, was murder-suicided off the Vincent Thomas Bridge, and that her grandfather was suicided off the Brooklyn Bridge. That's Elizabeth Montgomery. That's two people that she may have known. You know, Elizabeth Montgomery was diagnosed with colon cancer at age 62, and she was dead in 8 weeks, while she was married to this Robert Foxwell, who appeared in a Columbo where he was the killer. This is crazy. This is like crazy, crazy, crazy. You should know that Elizabeth Montgomery died 33 days after her 62nd birthday. That's right, I said 33. So the Mad Bomber of New York, he planted 33 bombs and was sent to Beacon, New York, where Elizabeth Montgomery's father was born. And Elizabeth Montgomery died 33 days after her 62nd birthday, after she was diagnosed with cancer, and she's dead in 8 weeks. That is a real quick like a bunny rabbit cancer death. And she's associated with being the Lizzie Borden character. She played Lizzie Borden in The Murder of Andrew and Abby Borden. She has a statue as Samantha Stevens in Salem, Massachusetts. Yes, she does. They erected a statue 10 years after Elizabeth Montgomery's death, where she died in May 1995. And in 2005, the city of Salem erected a statue that's 6 feet tall. Just want to give you the. She died at about 8:30 a.m. in the morning on May 18th, 1995, is when Elizabeth Victoria Montgomery passed away in her home at 1230 Benedict Canyon Drive, cul-de-sac off Benedict Canyon Drive, the drive. See how confusing it is? There is a drive and there is a cul-de-sac, and they have the exact same name. That's the neighborhood that she more or less spent most of her life living in, Benedict Canyon, where Sharon Tate was murdered, where Superman was murdered, where Jean Harlow's husband was murdered, where Marion Davis's lover and William Randolph Hearst's friend was murdered. Can't make this stuff up, people. Anyway, the statue, I'm going to send you a link of the statue. It is beyond bizarre. The statue is located at 237 Essex Street, at the end of Essex Street in Lappin Park, Salem. It was erected in 2005. It shows Samantha Stevens from Bewitched, side saddle on a broom. Kind of sort of like the Wicked Witch of the West or the Wicked Witch of the East, Evelyn, or Evil, or Evil Mean. Except that Samantha Stevens was the good witch, right? She was the good witch from Bewitched. So I'm bewitched. Someone has cast a spell on me. Anyway, that's my video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. It just shows you the circle of trust and the penal colony military complex that is Benedict Canyon. It's a prison. That Westlake, Harvard Westlake School, that's a prison. The Sharon Tate murder scene, that's a porn set / murder scene where Jeffrey Franklin now resides. The home where Kitty and Jose Menendez were murdered, that's a clandestine service controlled house for Elton John, for Prince, for Mohammed, the real estate fellow from Palestine. He lived in that house for a short time. Michael Jackson, William Link of Columbo, he lived in that house. And Jose Menendez and Kitty, they didn't live in that house very long and spent very little time there because she's got a psychiatrist that she needs to see, psychologist, in Westlake Village. That's 45 minutes to the north, up near Calabasas and over to Oxnard. So, Thousand Oaks. That's it. Please share my videos. I am shadow banned. Take care. Bye-bye.